Our speaker is Guy Verhofstadt, and as former Prime Minister of Belgium, leader of the group of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe, and chief Brexit negotiator for the European Parliament, Mr. Verhofstadt's reputation for being a staunch proponent for a strong, integrated, and united Europe precedes him. He is the author of a very timely book entitled Europe's Last Chance: Why the European States Must Form a More Perfect Union, and it is the basis of his discussion this evening.
This book, Europe's Last Chance, is telling three things. Why a disintegration of the Union could happen. So it's a real threat, it's a reality. Brexit is not something that happened by accident. There is a problem in the European Union, a problem of a possible disintegration. The second thing what the book is doing, it's telling why this will be a disaster, this disintegration of the European Union. Not only for the Europeans, but also for America, for the United States of America. I'm always saying America can only walk on two legs, an American leg and a European leg. That's the transatlantic partnership that was so successful since the end of the Second World War. And the third thing what the book tells you is how to avoid it. It's a book, a positive book at the end, saying what needs to be done to avoid it. And to avoid it, well, what needs to be done is mainly looking to the history of the American Federation and looking to the way how at the end of the 18th century, from a loose confederation of 13 states, you became a good working federation after the Convention of Philadelphia. So that is mainly what the book is doing. So disintegration is possible. I'm very critical towards the European Union in this book. There are many people who are saying, yeah, you're more critical than the Eurosceptics. Well, yeah, in some way, I'm more critical than the Eurosceptics about the actual way of working of this European Union. A European Union who is always acting too little, too late. That is for the moment, if you have to describe the European Union, it's a confederation of member states, of nation states, still based on the unanimity rule. You need the approval of 28 member states before you can act. Before you can act on issues of financial crisis, on issues of investment, on whatever issue. And so the problem of the European Union is that it is still a confederation based on that unanimity rule. You need the approval of the 28 before you can decide on a bailout for Greece. You need to have the approval of the 28 before you can have a common position on the tragedy in Syria. So I compare it always, and I do that in the book, with the United States. Imagine one moment that America should function on the same rules as the European Union today. What should it mean? It should mean that there is no Obama or no Trump, no one president. It should be the 50 governors of the 50 states of the United States of America deciding on everything based on unanimity, coming together 4 times a year, 6 times a year, somewhere in Washington, for example, and there then deciding, all 50 together, on what we're going to do with the dollar, what we're going to do with whatever problem that the US is facing. And they should only can take a decision with unanimity. If one of these governors is saying, I doesn't agree, nothing is happening. That is the way the European Union is working today, still based on this unanimity rule. Some countries are in the euro, other countries are outside the euro. Some countries are inside Schengen, that is the freedom of movement inside the European Union. Other countries are outside. We have even the particularity that there are some countries of the European Union not participating in Schengen and countries outside the European Union participating in Schengen. For example, Switzerland. And then we have to explain to the public opinion what the European Union means. That was not put in the American edition, but in the Dutch edition, there are 12 maps of the 12 existing European unions of today. The European Union. The European Union of the single currency. The European Union of Schengen. The European Union of the European patent on research and so on. The European Union of the judicial cooperation, and so on and so on. So European Union is a complex animal today because of the numerous opt-ins, opt-outs, exceptions, earmarks, rebates that have been created the last year. And the best way to describe the results of such a European Union is to look to the way how America has in fact emerged from the financial crisis, what they have developed as policies, and how the European Union has done this. America immediately, Republicans and Democrats together, have launched what I call a rocket with 3 stages. First, TARP, Troubled Asset Relief Program to clean up the banks, $400 billion. Then an investment program on a period of 10 years, still in place. The program, investment program, 2009-2019, with a total amount of $900 billion. And then the Federal Reserve, quantitative easing to stimulate the economy with $1.2 trillion. So in total, an enormous amount, several trillions, and that was immediately decided on the federal level and in a combination. First, it was the Republicans who started with it, and it was the Obama administration who continued that. But you have to compare that with what in Europe is happening. In Europe, we still not have cleaned up the banks after the outbreak of the financial crisis. Every week, every month, you can read in your newspaper that then there is a German bank, then there is a Spanish bank, or it is a Greek bank. Now it are Italian banks who have difficulties and who have a lack of liquidity and who are in difficulties. We have not cleaned up our banks. We have an investment program in total to overcome the fallout of the financial crisis of 300 billion, more or less, euro, what is 1/3 of the American investment program. And yeah, we did quantitative easing also for an amount of more than 1 trillion with the European Central Bank, but that was at the end to avoid, in a defensive way, to avoid deflation, not in the beginning of the outbreak of the financial crisis, to stimulate the economy as what happened here in the United States. So the question is, how is it possible that in the United States of America, within a period of 9 months, they can decide immediately on such a rocket with 3 stages, TARP, investment, quantitative easing, for a total amount of more than 2 trillion, and why it is that we are not capable to do so? Well, the reason is very simple, because our institutions are not capable to do so. We need 28 approvals of the 20 heads of states and government before we can act. For example, on cleaning up the banks, creating a banking union. We didn't do that in 2008. We had to wait for problems with Spanish banks in 2010, 2011, before we did it. And if tomorrow we need money to save a bank on the European level, well, it's not available, because we are still debating between the 28 member states of the European Union who has to contribute, what the amounts are that the different member states have to contribute to that fund. And there lies the problem of the European Union. It is not a union. It's, like I said, a confederation of member states based on unanimity. And the consequence of it is that if some of the heads of states think that we have to follow Ferguson, and half of the other heads of states think that we have to follow Krugman, for example, well, nothing is happening in the European Union. We are debating about the best way out of the crisis, but it continues to be a debate. No real action is undertaken. That is the problem. It's an institutional problem, a political problem. And we all know that institutional and political problems are key for the economy. The book continues to explain then what is absolutely necessary. And I make on many pages and in many chapters the comparison with what is happening in the US. If you want a stable currency for the moment and a successful economic policy, you need to underpin this single currency, not only with a so-called Stability and Growth Pact, and not only with the European Central Bank. No, you need a government. You need a treasury. You need a common management, at least partially, of your debt. You need everything what is necessary for a currency. what happened in America? In America, you started in 1787 with the Federation, and then Hamilton came and said, and we need the Treasury, and we need also, naturally, Treasury certificates. And there was the big battle with Jefferson, and finally the deal was done. Hamilton got his Treasury certificates, and Jefferson, Washington as the capital of the United States of America. That was the deal that was done. I'm always joking in Europe in saying maybe we could make the same deal. We make Berlin the capital of Europe, and they agree on Eurobonds, and maybe then we can emerge from the crisis. But the reason why I'm telling you that is because it's obvious that in America, first a federation, then a government, then a treasury, then treasury certificates, and only then in the beginning of the 19th century, you started with the dollar. We are far more intelligent. We start with a single currency in the euro. And then after a while we say, oh, well, we don't have a proper government. We don't have a treasury. We don't have treasury certificates. We don't have all the tools and the instruments that you need to have a currency. And we don't have also on the European level a budget to underpin that. The budget of the European Union. The so-called superstate, European superstate that we have created is 1% of the European GDP. I call it a joke. America is 23% of the American GDP, the federal budget. A confederation like Switzerland, for example, is 15% of their GDP. It's impossible with 1% to govern a single currency, have a common economic strategy in the whole of the European Union for the moment. But it's the same also on other issues. For example, we start with Schengen, so this freedom of movement internally in the European Union, without first of all starting with a European border and coast guard. If you want to have freedom of movement inside, I think always the first thing to do is to manage together the outside protection of your border, and to do it in an appropriate way. Not to be depending from one or other national authority in Greece or in Italy who is doing or not doing their job. Today we have now created this European Border and Coast Guard. Budget of the European Border and Coast Guard, 254 million of euros. You know what your budget is in total for the American Border and Coast Guard? If you take the department budget of Homeland Security, you take out everything what is concerning immigration, customs, border control, Coast Guard, and so on, it's $32 billion. And the total Homeland Security budget is more than $60 billion. So if you want to start with Schengen, the first thing to do is really a good management of your external border before you can say, oh, and then I abolish the internal borders in the Union. And I can continue like that. On the fight against terrorism and criminality, I'm always giving the FBI as an example, and European politicians are saying, no, that's not necessary. We're going to better coordinate the efforts on the national level. But you know better than I do that when President McKinley was murdered, that was the reason to create the FBI, to start with an FBI, based on the idea that there are some crimes that are so important, that are interstate, I should say, transnational, we should say in Europe, that you need to have a federal bureau of investigation, that you cannot solve on the level of one or another state, or as we say, one or another nation state. And the same is for defense. You cannot say that Europe doesn't do any defense effort. We have in total, with the 28 member states, a budget for defense that is more or less representing 42% of the American budget. You can say that's not a lot, 42%, but yeah, the American budget is a big budget on military and on defense. Well, the European Union together represents 42% of the American budget. But that's the input. Now look to the output. We are only capable to do 10 to 12% of the operations of the American army. So I did not mathematics, I'm a lawyer, so I can be wrong. But if I can count a little bit, if you spend 42% of the American budget and you can only do 10 to 12% of their operations, you're 3 to 4 times less effective. That is the reality. And it's obvious why it is like that, because we do 28 times the same thing. We have 28 times a strategic air transport and a tactical air transport, and so on and so on. So the first thing to do is not to increase budgets in Europe. The first thing to do is to create a European defense community, not outside the NATO, inside, as the European pillar next to the American pillar, to make the NATO also more effective. But certainly you have heard from many of maybe European friends that you have who are telling you, yeah, okay, that's a federalist idea. And in fact, the people in Europe doesn't like that. They don't want such a European, I quote, superstate of 1% of the European GDP. Well, the opposite is true, because what people doesn't like is the European Union as it works today. They are very critical. That's the reason why we have this rise in populism and nationalism in Europe. It's not abnormal that people, citizens in Europe, are following this rhetoric of these nationalists and populists, because they see a European Union which is not capable to deal with all these crises. While naturally, if you ask to the European citizens in this same survey, what do you think? Is it necessary that the European Union develops more policies to fight against terrorism? 70 to 80% of the people say yes. Is it necessary that we create a European army? 70% of the citizens say yes. If you ask them, is it necessary that we develop an investment program on the European level to fight against the fallout of the financial crisis? 70% say yes. Is it necessary to save banks on the European level to clean them up? 60 to 70% say yes. So people are very critical towards the European Union, but they are not critical towards the idea that it is on the European level that you have to fight against terrorism, that you have to fight against climate change, that you need to tackle the financial crisis and the economic fallout of it. So it's not true. People don't see for the moment a vision, a project that can solve this crisis, and they fall back into the classic nationalist and populist rhetoric. It's so easy for a populist to say, yeah, it doesn't work, European Union. Well, let's go back to the old-style nation-states of the 19th century and of the beginning of the 20th century. It's easy to make that case. It's far more difficult to explain that the problem is not Europe as such, that we need to reform Europe, to make it a real federation, capable to act not only in the economic field, but also by establishing a defense union, by establishing a European investigation capacity, by establishing a real European border and coast guard to protect our external borders, what is nearly the case today. And that is what the book is about. My proposal is that we use the Brexit negotiation of today also to launch a second track in which we reform this European Union and we make it fit for purpose, fit for the future. And it's not necessary to invent a lot of things. We simply have to go back to the founding fathers of the European Union in the 50s. You were talking about the coal and steel community. It started there in the beginning of the 50s. 6 countries, 3 Benelux countries, Italy, France, and Germany coming together. And after they started with the steel and coal community, they were so positive that they say, oh, we have to go further. And they developed a first constitution for the European Union in 1952-53. We call that the Constitution von Brantane, because it was a German who was responsible for it. And this constitution, was nearly not a copy-paste of the American Constitution, but was based on the same principles. It was a political union. It was a defense union. It was a European Parliament controlling that. It was a small executive. It was a Senate representing the member states in one or another way. With the budget, with taxation. That's normal, that you collect income to finance your public goods. So it was not a copy-paste of the American, but it was inspired by the same basic ideas. There are no miracles in politics. There are a number of basic ideas to govern a country, and certainly a federal state or a federal entity. Well, and then happened what I think was a disaster for Europe. In 1954, the French National Assembly refused the defense union for different reasons, but the main reason was that the new prime minister at that moment, Pierre Mendès France, was new, and it was a project of his predecessor. So he didn't defend it before the National Assembly, before the French Parliament. For him, it was he didn't launch the confidence vote, like we say, to go through with that project. So once the defense union refused by the French, there was no longer a need for a political union. There was no longer a need for that constitution, a constitution that was accepted by a big majority, unanimity of the representatives of the 6 member states, of the steel and coal community, with unanimity besides 5 abstentions. Not so bad in politics, unanimity besides 5 abstentions. But okay, it was refused, not ratified, as we say, by one of the member states. You were far more intelligent, because in 1787, there were at least 4 of the states who didn't agree with the transformation of the confederation in a federation. And what you did was, well, there is a new rule now, 9 on 13, there's a new majority rule. So you can enter or you leave. And all 4, the last was Rhode Island, if I don't make a mistake, entered in the federation. In Europe, not. In Europe, the whole project, the constitution made by the founding fathers, Monet, Schuman, Adenauer, and all these people who worked on this and who found it the real answer to the atrocities of the Second World War, well, this whole project was put in the freezer, I should say, and they agreed then to do something on which everybody agreed, to make a customs union. And that customs union became the Treaty of Rome, 1957. In our universities and in our schools, when we are talking about the European Union, they tell us, oh, European Union, that started just after the Second World War. That was the answer to the atrocities of the Second World War. And it was a big success. We started with the steel and coal community, and then step by step, we built up the European Union as today. It's a lie. The reality, it was a failure from day one. Because at the moment we needed to push forward and to create a federation, that attempt to do so was stopped in a brutal way. And the only thing we could do was to create the customs union as we have today. So what I'm proposing is that we go back to the ideas of the founding fathers. And that in parallel, I should say, with the negotiations on the Brexit, who will lead to a new partnership with Britain, we also put in place this new, modern, effective European Union. And that doesn't mean a European Commission of 28 portfolios, because there are 28 member states. That means a small, real European government, controlled by 2 bodies, Parliament representing the citizens, the Senate representing the member states, with the real budget, with the defense union, with everything what is needed to make the union more effective. And then I'm concluding. What is now in the American interest? To have such a European Union that can be the ally of America, because we share the same values in an unsecure world with China, with Russia, or a disintegrating union, as Trump was referring to. I think it would be a big mistake to give up the transatlantic partnership. A big, big mistake. We share the same values. What the American president has to do is to push the European unions, push them to make their unity, to go further in their integration. That is the interest of America. And certainly not to fall into a period of protectionism. Protectionism has never created in the midterm or in the long term wealth or jobs. It gives the illusion that you can safeguard in the short term, maybe a few jobs. But what you do, in fact, is you make, in fact, all goods, all services more costly. You reduce the purchasing power of poor people. That is what, in the midterm, protectionism is doing. And so what we need is an America, is United States, based on its own experience, fantastic experience and history, push the Europeans in the right direction. And that is far better than to embrace, I don't know what, whatever British politician like Mr. Farage, because he likes to disintegrate the Union. And a last element, what I want to say, the reason why we need this transatlantic relationship and to go further in a transatlantic relationship is also to remember all those people who fought for it. I come from Belgium. What is the biggest battle of the American army? The Battle of the Bulge in Belgium, who defeated finally Nazi and Hitler. Oh, we can never forget it. We have a shared history, we have shared value, and nobody, even an American president, can take that away. Thank you very much.
For more on this program and other Carnegie Ethics Studio productions, visit carnegiecouncil.org. There you can find video highlights, transcripts, audio recordings, and other multimedia resources on global ethics. This program is made possible by the Carnegie Ethics Studio and viewers like you.